Hello and welcome, everyone. Good day to everyone who's joined in. So I'm here today to talk to Mahesh Krishnaswamy, who's the founder and CEO of Taara. Now, we're going to be covering what I think is a pretty hot and emerging topic. Everybody the middle mile has frequently been just talked about as backhaul for the mobile network. And in some ways, it's kind of a somewhat overlooked area in the past, perhaps, but I think increasingly critical part of the mobile network, today and going forward. So, I'm going to be talking with Mahesh today about the kind of current landscape, how we've got here, maybe try to figure out like where there's some gaps, what are the alternatives that are emerging, where Taara fits into all of this, and kind of also introduce the new TCO calculator that GSMAi Intelligence and Taara have worked on together, and walk you through that, hopefully show you a demo, a live demo, and then sort of point the way forward. All right. So without further ado, let me welcome Mahesh. Hi, Mahesh. How are you?
Hi, Shiv. Good to see you again, and great to have the conversation. And hello, everyone.
So, Mahesh, we've known each other a few years, give or take, I would say. And I think when we first met, Taara was still, part of X and under the broader Google umbrella, if I can call it that. And I know things have moved quite rapidly since then. And it's probably a little over a year, if I'm correct, when Taara graduated. I love that term, by the way, graduated from X. And you're now sort of not far, but like you've far. I mean, you moved away from the mothership in some senses, right? So now a lot of people who have logged on, or are listening will already know about you and Taara and stuff like this. But I'm sure we have some new listeners. So maybe why don't you kick us off, and give us introduce yourself, Taara, the company, and maybe just talk, a bit of specifics about what you're trying to solve. Like, what is the problem that Taara is trying to solve? So,
sure, happy to share more. So, Taara, as the name indicates, is a Sanskrit word which basically means star in Sanskrit, and it's basically our North Star. And our North Star has always been the same, even when we were inside Google, as much as we are on the outside right now. So, just as you mentioned, from context standpoint, we incubated Taara inside Google X, which is Alphabet's moonshot engine. This is the same group that has produced companies like Waymo, which is the self-driving car, or Wing, which is the autonomous drone delivery. So we are sort of in the same gene pool. And about a year ago, we graduated out of Google X, and that's a term that we use after incubating a project for several years and then coming out on the outside, raising real capital outside investors. And we are able to hear some interference on the other side. Lida, if you don't mind going on. Okay, all right. So it's been about a year since we graduated, and now we are out into the real world. And our mission has been to provide internet access using beams of light. And so it's basically solving the challenge of internet connectivity. And even to this day, roughly a third of the world is still offline. And what we are really looking at is a novel way by which we can provide high-speed internet access without having to dig in trench and lay fiber everywhere. And we are trying to provide the speeds of fiber with the flexibility of wireless. And that's essentially been our core mission of providing an end-to-end light-based connectivity.
Okay, fantastic. But then elaborate on that a little more, because you are this is based on free space optics, right? Like, which is the original. I mean, it's not a new technology, but you have really developed it more, and now the new product, Lightbridge, correct? Which is what you launched last year, and I think now you have some follow-ups to that. So, should we be thinking about this now as, I mean, a clear alternative to, everyone talks about fiber and microwave, and we'll talk about that some more, but those are the dominant kind of technologies used for the middle mile and transport and backhaul, whichever whatever you want to call them. So is this how you're positioning, Taara and the Lightbridge product family and stuff?
Yeah, that's correct. So Taara uses fundamentally a technology called free space optical communication, or FSOC, or FSO in the past, as people have referred to. And this is the same technology that people have been using to communicate from here to the moon and Mars. And what we have done is essentially radically commercialized this. And what we have spent almost a decade working inside Google is to hone this technology and make it commercially viable, making it more deployable in real world. So as we speak, we have now deployed in over 20 countries, and we are live serving many operators, telcos, fiber providers, as well as ISPs. And the way to think about FSO is a way by which you can augment existing solutions where it's not adequate. And it basically allows you to go places where, for example, it's difficult to dig and trench or wait for permits on fiber. You can use Taara to kind of close that bridge. You can also use this as a backup to fiber if there is already fiber, but it's unreliable and subject to a lot of frequent cuts. So yes, it is in many sense helping and augmenting fiber. But on the other side, if you look at the other way by which people have been providing connectivity is using radio frequencies. This ranges from your microwave all the way to your millimeter wave solution. And we are able to effectively augment that as well. So you don't need any spectrum licenses. You don't need to worry about interference associated with this, because these laser beams are very narrow. So you can effectively provide connectivity and speeds like fiber, but with just the flexibility of wireless solutions. So the way we think about FSO is to basically help close the gaps where fiber can go, augment fiber. And sometimes we can also use this as a true comparison to say, like, what makes sense from a cost-effective standpoint. And you can look at all this, which is what really the topic is today, is to compare FSO technology with some of the existing solutions out there from a true cost of ownership standpoint.
Okay. And just to clarify, like in Taara terminology, you refer to this as wireless optical communications or something like that, if I'm correct, WOC. Like it'll come up later, but I just wanted to reconfirm that for people listening. So that's what you're calling it within Taara?
Okay. That is correct. In the past, we have this technology was known as free space optical communication. It's a mouthful, and people try to find it difficult to understand what does that mean. But what we are really pioneering here is a leap forward in communications, and especially wireless communications, using the optical domain. So we use the same frequencies that's inside a fiber, but we provide the same speeds, but wirelessly. So that's why it makes more sense to call this wireless optical communication, and we call it WOC, and some of them also refer to it as OWC, or optical wireless communication, but it's effectively the same thing.
Okay. Fantastic, because that's kind of the way you framed it is very interesting, that sort of the speeds of fiber, but with the flexibility of wireless. And if you're a mobile operator, from their point of view, traditionally it's basically been the options you had were fiber and microwave, right? Like the rule of thumb was basically fiber is sort of preferred. We do it as often and as many places as we can, and kind of microwave everything else. I mean, obviously I'm paraphrasing a little bit, taking some license here, but that was basically what was happening, so, but today sort of networks are changing fundamentally, right? So they're much more distributed. They're sort of increasingly kind of virtualized, cloudified. Like you've got now edge investments. The whole thing is spreading out. Even on the RAN side, you've got open RAN. Stretching the whole thing out. So backhaul, as we knew it, is also changing, and so we've been tracking operators globally, push sort of harder and harder to achieve universal coverage, if I can call it that. And they've done great work. They've brought the coverage gap down to like low single digits, I would say. And that's commendable, but there are still gaps. So can they do it with fiber and microwave? Or if I'm guessing you're going to say no, but if not, what's preventing them from doing it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you were to simplistically think about it, the gold standard has been to dig and bury and lay fiber wherever you can. It is very, very costly. It's expensive to get those permits, and not to mention the time it takes, and it's environmentally disruptive. So people have resorted to alternate solutions like aerial fiber is another one, but it's subject to a lot of frequent cuts, or eventually going to radio frequency and microwave and millimeter wave and so on and so forth. The challenge with, let's start with fiber first. The challenge with fiber is that, it's easier said than done, but the amount of cost and the time and energy is one part, and then the disruptions is another issue. The second issue with respect to radio frequency is that they have their own set of limitations. More often than not, in this age of AI, more and more applications are bandwidth hungry, and you need a lot more higher amount of throughput. And one way by which radio frequency has solved it is to go higher up in the frequency spectrum. So we went from 2.4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz to eventually 60, 70, 80 gigahertz right now. And that's mainly because it's going higher in frequency in search for more bandwidth, more speeds to pack more users. And what we are really finding out, even that is inadequate. And very soon we're going to be hitting a wall, which is called as the terahertz gap, where you can't pack any more amount of radio frequency. And it's that part of the electromagnetic spectrum where you can transmit or receive, and it's too fast for optics, too fast for electronics, but it's also too slow for optics. So effectively, we are about to hit a wall in terms of radio frequency. And so what Taara is really trying to solve is that gap, where now you can actually go higher up. We are literally leapfrogging over the terahertz gap and using the optical domain, but there's nobody out there. In fact, you can pack the entire RF spectrum in the optical domain, and you won't even scratch the surface. So there's nobody out there. There's interference free. The energy consumption is very, very low when you're using the optical domain, and you can essentially transmit at the speed of light. And you don't need any spectrum licensing or any of those challenges, and it's interference free, and it's one of the most secure forms of communication. So you get all of these advantages by doing it, and that's essentially what we are really looking for, is a wireless optical communication which can really harness the power of the electromagnetic spectrum without compromising on any of the things like speed, feeds, latency, power, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so thanks. So when you speak to your customers, mobile operators in this case, or providers, right? So from their point of view, I mean, they already are quite heavily invested in, the existing sort of bouquet of options that they have, right? I mean, and there's a strong, very mature industry sort of pushing behind that, and the whole supply chain is set. So most operators, when they talk to you, like their first question presumably is about, what is this going to cost me? Or are they asking you about the energy consumption that you just mentioned? Or what are like the top 3 things that they ask you when you go to talk to them?
It's funny enough, the first few questions that they ask is like, well, this seems novel. Why haven't we heard this so far? Why hasn't been prevalent? Okay. Which is what we're trying to fix. I mean, there's an awareness issue in general, and any new technology takes time for the word to spread. The second question that they ask is like, what are the limitations? And any high frequency solution has its own set of challenges. And in the case of wireless optical communication, or anytime you're using optics, it comes down to your dispersion in the optical domain. So specifically in the case of free space optics, it comes down to fog. So anything that matches the wavelength starts to disperse the light. So we struggle in heavy foggy conditions. But that's true with any high frequency solutions as well. If you go to millimeter wave, they're subject to rain fade. So we tend to do better in rain, but not so much in foggy areas. So there's ways by which we can overcome it. I'm happy to tell you how we navigate the challenges around fog. But at a high level, that's the next question that they ask is like, what are some of the challenges and weather conditions and stuff like that. So we actually have been working on a link planner which can anticipate what the predicted availability is in any given location. It's obviously location dependent, distance dependent, and we are able to solve for it ahead of time before we actually put or install the terminals anywhere. The third question that they asked is like, well, how is this different than any satellite-based solutions out there? And just basically point it up to the sky and you're up and running. I saw a question that come up. This is a line of sight technology. You're talking about beams the size of a pencil, pointing at a coin, almost a football field, or maybe even several kilometers away. And that's been one of our advancements, is the pointing and tracking solution. So these are the three questions, like, why haven't I heard it? How does it perform under weather conditions? And then how does this compare to satellite operators and Starlink and so on and so forth?
Okay, I'm impressed that you have not mentioned the cost word at all. So that doesn't come up. It sounds like, but
it does. I think
jokes
buried in all of these things is that.
Yeah. Yes, that's of course. So that's where, and I think this was the the root of what sort of led to the creation of this TCO calculator, right? Which is how can operators objectively compare these technologies and kind of figure out what, on a sort of per link basis, if I can call it that, what is it going to cost? How do these things play out? And I mentioned the word deployment scenario because this is kind of important to understand. I mentioned sort of how networks are changing before, but the amount of variance is increasingly sort of wide and getting more and more complex, right? I mean, different countries, different regions, and how do they objectively compare one versus the other? And why don't we sort of start talking about, just pivot a little bit and start talking about the calculator itself and what you have just launched. Congrats, by the way. It looks really cool. And I think you're going to show this to us, but just for people who are wondering, what is this TCO calculator we're talking about? It's a tool developed jointly between Taara and GSMAi Intelligence, and this will help sort of simulate the cost of ownership for operators across multiple scenarios. And we have a number of sort of key takeaways. I mean, some should be pretty sort of self-evident. Obviously, fiber is the most expensive, but perhaps has the most capacity. Microwave is much cheaper, but lower capacity. And technologies like the wireless optical communications can kind of provide the best of both in certain scenarios. So these are all some things that we played with, but it was important to kind of build something and allow people a chance to plug in their own data and see what comes out on the other side. Would you sort of agree with that that framing, or was there another a different way you thought about the calculator?
I think the reason why we work together on this TCO calculator is several times the operator, once they go through this initial sort of question, underlying behind this is like, is this the right solution for me for the kind of application that I have? And it's very hard because now they have to do the hard work of trying to compare our specs with somebody else's specs, our speeds with somebody else's speeds, and then the pricing and everything else. And so it's not an easy solution. And sometimes, especially when you're comparing with fiber, you have to take a lot of factors into account, like your permitting, your right-of-way, your maintenance cost, your switching cost, and circuits. And there's a lot more that goes in, and the labor cost, not to mention fiber is being hard sourced these days also with all the data center build-outs. So there is a lot that goes in, and we are trying to come up with a simple enough model where there's some default numbers in the tool, but at the same time, the operator can put in their own specific numbers for the region. If they know their cost structure of their current solution, they can input it and then compare it against the alternative. And it's just another an estimator, a tool that people can quickly use it. And we try to comprehensively look at all the factors. If you look at RF, you have to take into account spectrum, licenses, renewal, and the interference costs associated with the capacity limitation. So there's several things that go in here. And the TCO calculator that I'll just show in a second is a comprehensive tool that allows you to take the defaults, but also give you the flexibility to override any of those underlying assumptions. So you can see for yourself if this is the right solution for it. And sometimes the answer maybe it's not. And that's totally fine. But what we want to make sure is people have the knowledge and the information so that they can make a well-informed decision rather than writing it off.
No, no, great. Thank you. And before I know you have a nice video to show us in a second, but to introduce the calculator. But I should also just mention for those listening, you know, we uh, we covered three sort of main regions for in this exercise. One, of course, was North America, the APAC region, but also Europe, and hopefully we will be able to add more. But those were the three that we began this with, and you will see that in the calculator. And in terms of deployment scenarios, okay, this obviously there's a lot of variation, as I said, but we kind of grouped everything into urban, semi-urban and rural. And you can see some of this once we get to the demo portion. But Mahesh, I think you had a video that we could all watch and learn.
There is a video that I can that's also available and we can post. But I think it'll be more powerful if I can brave myself to do a live demo, and hopefully this works flawlessly. And if not, you know what they say about doing live demos. So let me just flip over. So the simplest, and others on the audience can also follow along with me. You can do this yourself, but I'm just going to show you how to access the calculator and the tool. And then after the webinar, you feel free to try it out yourself. But all you have to do is go to taaraconnect.com, which is our home base. Okay, great. So you go to taaraconnect.com, and right at the top itself, you can see a calculator, and you can click on Learn More. And you'll see the TCO calculator and see what the true cost of your next high capacity link. And all you have to do is then click Calculate your TCO, and it opens up a simple one-page calculator. You can start inputting things.
Mahesh, sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think the page has refreshed yet, or we're still seeing that.
Okay, there it is.
Okay, now, yeah, there you go.
Okay, this is what they say about live demos. So it opens up another browser, which is what I should have shared, and that allows you to input all of things. So there's 3 steps to this. The first step is to put all your inputs. The second one is to add any optional cost that you might want to override. And then the third thing is just basically get to see the results. So I'm going to quickly go through and say, like, let's pick a region. Let's take the US, and you can take the geotype. Let's say it's dense urban area where you're trying to do this, and you need, let's say, 20 gigabits per second. In this case, it's only giving you 50, but our product right now, Lightbridge, can do up to 20 gigabits per second bidirectionally. And the reason why we are trying to limit it is so that we have a true comparison with RF. So we have, let's say, half the capacity of what Taara Lightbridge does, but traditional RF can do 10 gigabits per second. So that's what we're trying to compare. And let's say comparing a 20% growth year over year, and let's say you want to go through 10 kilometers of distance. And again, Lightbridge can go up to 20 kilometers point to point. And you want to compare this over 4 years, and you can pick whether it's a redundant link or is it a primary link. And this is where you start to pick your product. So Taara Lightbridge is a product that we have been running the market, and very soon we're going to be having Taara Lightbridge Pro. And so that'll start to show up as additional products come up, but that's the one that you're trying to cover. And like I said, you have the product is capable of doing 20 gigabits per second, a range of 20 kilometers point to point. It does require line of sight. And we're meeting at least the Telcordia standards for 7 years, but it's actually designed for much more than that. But as you can see, the inputs that I put is almost half of it. I'm only putting half the speeds, half the range, and even for a shorter period of time. But you can, again, override any of these things. And in terms of comparing RF, you can basically say, yes, RF is an option, and you can pick your frequency, whichever one you want. Let's say you want to go something more comparable to like an E-band solution. And let's say you have 56 megahertz of bandwidth. And in this case, you're not having multiple bands, you're just using only one band. And let's say you're also using and comparing it with fiber. So you have to compare a fiber route. Now, typically, 10 kilometers is point to point as the crow flies. But when you're running fiber, it goes through a lot more distance. And let's say it's 15 kilometers. But let's say somehow you are able to string a fiber directly. And it's literally as a crow flies, which is highly unlikely, but that's what you put in. And you can put down how much of it is buried versus aerial. You can split that. You can do 50-50, 10-50. You can do 0-100, however you want to do it. And then you can just basically, is this least fiber? No. So then you actually get to the next page, which is the cost input. And you can basically have all your cost inputs. If you want to override, I know exactly what the cost of pole, fabrication, all of the things, you can override it. Or you can just, if you're not sure, just leave it as default, which is what GSMAi has used from all their expertise and calculated this. And once you have this, and for now, I'm just going to leave everything as default. But like I said, you can override any of these things, and then you can calculate. You just quickly put down your details here of who you are, and you just click agree to the terms and policies. And that basically then gives you a summary. And this is the results. So you're basically looking at a US 10 kilometer in a dense urban situation for just 4 years for 10 gigabits per second service with a growth of 20% and using comparing Taara Lightbridge to other solutions. And right here is your high-level summary, where you have wireless optical communication, which gives you a breakdown of costs of CapEx, OpEx, your dollar per Gbps, dollar per Gbps per kilometer, or even dollar per GB, whichever way is your metric that you want to compare it. And you compare it with radio frequency, and you compare it with fiber. And if you go further down, you have much more detailed analysis on a year-over-year breakdown for each one of these things, included also as a bar graph. You can see how the costs change, whether you own fiber, how that compares versus walk. And then you can see year one deployments, like obviously fiber is going to require a significant amount of upfront digging and trenching investments, but over the years, you're going to have some basic level of maintenance on these. And so that's basically your high-level summary. You can then print these results. You can run a new calculation. You can go back and revisit the costs, or you can just export these. Or if you're interested in exploring this, you can just start, reaching out and having the right conversations. But it's a quick way by which you can compare your costs in your region for your applications and see what is the one that makes the most amount of sense.
Fantastic. We've got a number of questions coming in already, but okay, so let me ask you, did you want to run one more scenario for, quickly for people, or pick
Sure.
something completely, maybe Asia Pacific or Europe rural or something like that, just to kind of get the
let's do that.
Point
Let's do
of
that. I'm
reference.
gonna go back to so we go back to running our calculator, and let's pick up Asia Pacific, for example. And again, let's pick a dense urban or even a suburban situation. And then let's go 10 gigabits per second over here. Same, maybe Asia Pacific has a higher growth rate, 30. And then your link distance, let's call this 15 kilometers, a little bit more. Same 3-year, shorter time horizon. And then you want to use a redundant link, use Taara Lightbridge, and then RFE is an option. And in this case, let's compare, say, something like a 14 to 25 gigahertz. Let's call it 50 megahertz of bandwidth. No, and you are going to go here, and let's go here. Let's call it 50% buried, and then 50% aerial. And you can then, we have to run obviously the fiber routes, even though we said 10 kilometers, and because of the windiness, we'll have to go for a little bit more, twice the distance typically. And then you can run the actual TCO. Again, I'm going to leave things as default, but you can override any one of these.
Yeah.
And then you put the information in, agree, calculate, and here you can start seeing in Asia Pacific, you saw a much more higher number. Now this is almost half the cost. And we've changed quite a few of the parameters here as well, but you can start to see that fiber still remains very expensive, even though we're going 50-50. You can change this to entirely aerial and see how that compares. But you're starting to come closer to radio frequency solutions out there. And the same story holds for the rest of the calculation.
Oh, that's great. And I think it's important to sort of highlight, you touched on it earlier, that there will be scenarios, perhaps kind of dense urban in some areas where fiber works out much better, or people have their own cost inputs to put in, and then you see something a bit different. But I think this has enough flexibility to kind of crunch numbers for a lot of different scenarios. Yeah. So in terms of, and for us, we were obviously very sort of this was a lot of fun and very exciting for us to work on with you as well. But before, let's sort of kind of wrap up this part, the discussion part with, as we spent several months kind of working on this, but in terms of some key takeaways that I could leave you with, the first one, it was very clear that one size in this sort of increasingly sort of evolving kind of network architecture and everything else that we're seeing in this transition, one size is not going to fit all, and operators clearly need a broader mix of a broader product mix and options for to service their backhaul requirements. And each of these, second one is each of them have their specific benefits and constraints, and operators really need to consider what is the best for each specific deployment scenario that they're facing. And it's also clear that technologies like Taara's and others are emerging to plug certain gaps. So we have a much broader mix of options than we were accustomed to. So I think with that, let's open it up to some questions, and let's take.
Yeah,
okay.
I saw a lot of questions come in, and feel free to drop more questions.
Yeah, so
Shiv, I don't know, however you want to run this.
Yeah, you want me to just read these out to you? So that'll be simple. I think the first one I see here, a question from Ahmed. How much throughput is lost due to adverse weather conditions, the kind that you mentioned, dense fog, heavy rain, and so on, and any mitigating solutions like diversity?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So typically, when we are operating and you have clear line of sight, you are going to get the full 20 gigabits per second. So there's not going to be any degradation or anything like that. However, we've now recently implemented a adaptive rate change. So when you're running into, say, heavy rain or adverse weather conditions, we can start changing the modulation and the rate. So we can come down from 20 gigabits per second down to 10, then down to 1 gigabit per second. At some point, if the weather is so adverse, then this comes back to the mitigation solutions. We can add an RF failover. So you can actually fall back to an RF, which may be 1 gigabit per second or 500 megabits per second. So you're not losing the connectivity completely, but you're just basically rate modulating it. And for the most part, we have enough margin in the tank to be able to plow through like light rain and typical weather conditions. But when it comes to adverse weather, like dense fog kind of situations, that's when we start to rate modulate and then eventually fail over to an RF. There's other ways by which we could be implementing this using a mesh solution. So if a particular link is experiencing fog, then we can reroute the traffic just like fiber does. If there's a fiber cut, it reroutes the traffic to another route. We are also working on a mesh solution. So that's another mitigation solution that we are working on.
Okay. Next, a question from Kevin Henry. He wants to know which tier 1 MNOs are using your solution, and is it POC or commercial already? I think you kind of mentioned this, but you can give some more color.
Yeah, I can disclose every one of them, but the ones that are publicly that we are working with is Airtel in India, where they've deployed it for both the mobile 5G backhaul as well as their broadband solutions. We are using the Taara Lightbridge solution to carry their 5G traffic, and we're basically helping them roll out 5G connectivity in vast locations in India. We've also been working with T-Mobile. We've done several deployments with them, from important events like Coachella, which is a very big music festival, to the US Open tennis tournament, to New York Times Square. And there's more interesting events that we will be covering as we go along with T-Mobile. So these are some of the tier 1 operators that we've been working on, and these are all commercial deployments.
Great, thanks. The next one is from Sundar Zahid. 10G E-band link compared to the solution in high-level price ratio model on marketing price. I'm not sure I quite understood that. He's basically asking, like, the distance would have to be larger, right? I think he's, between your solution versus 10G E-band links.
Yeah. I think I understand the gist of the question, and Sundar, feel free to fire away another question if I'm not answering it to the point. E-band, yes, correct, that it can deliver 10 gigabits per second. However, the range is very, very limited. If you're pushing it to a few kilometers at the max. So when you go for higher distances, your throughput starts to fall down. Whereas Taara Lightbridge can deliver the full 20 gigabits per second over the entire 20-kilometer distance. So there is no degradation as long as there's clear line of sight and the weather seems to be cooperating. We do, however, in many cases, have deployed links in combination with E-band. So a Taara Lightbridge can deliver a vast majority of the throughput, significant, let's say 98, 99% of the time. And that rare events when there is fog rolling over, we can fail over to an E-band, which will be delivering at slower speeds. And the way to think about it is the failure mechanism is almost mutually exclusive. E-band tends to do better in fog, but not so well in rain. We tend to do worse in fog, but we tend to do better in rain. So the combination of the two ends up to be a better solution where you can get almost near perfect availability without compromising on speed.
All right. So sort of the next question, is from Jefferson Wright Ceres. Hope I pronounced your name right, sir. He's asking, how does Taara plan to address the long tail of tier 2 operators across EMEA, whose rural coverage obligations are constrained not only by last mile economics, but also by the cost and difficulty of extending sufficient like middle mile and backhaul capacity?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the tool is a great first place. The biggest challenge when it comes to mid-mile connectivity, especially in rural parts, is the economics doesn't make sense. You don't know if there is enough demand. And so you're always wondering, if I were to dig and trench and bury fiber, only to find out that the demand isn't there, or we are waiting for the payback period, which is going to be very long. You can use this as a start, as a beachhead. You can put a Taara Lightbridge, get connected to a community, and see if there is enough demand. If there is enough demand, then you can run fiber over time. And while you're running fiber, which could take about a year or 2 years, depending on your permits and digging and trenching, you're connecting the community. And then when fiber is there, then you can use one as a failover to the other, and you have enough amount of redundancy. Or you can also move the Taara link, which you can do with fiber. You can move the Taara link to the next community. And so if you're looking to enhance and accelerate deployments, especially in tier 2 suburban or rural parts, you can use this as a beachhead, start exploring communities, start connecting them today. And then once you have your fiber or anything else laid over, you can then move this technology over to the next community and keep repeating it.
Thank you. There's a question from Georgina Santiago, who's an economic and regulatory consultant from Mexico. And she's asking, in countries where network expansion beyond 70% coverage is constrained by economics, okay, exactly what we've been talking about, difficult terrain, and where 5G deployment is still pending, what technology evolution path do you foresee? And, the sort of follow-up question to that is, how do operators assess long-term viability of adopting wireless optical comms today, versus other things are also going to come up. So, yeah.
So the way we think about it is, what we want to eventually build is an end-to-end light-based connectivity. We're starting out with proving that there is a way by which we can at least do the middle mile, the hardest 20 kilometers from a fiber point of presence to a community that is in need for connectivity. And that's a Taara Lightbridge. But our technology roadmap far expands. The next version is going to be called Lightbridge Pro, which will have an integrated switch. So we just talked about E-band and failover. So you can fail over to an E-band or an existing fiber or any other microwave solution. The next evolution of free space optics or wireless optical communication is going to be our photonics module. This is a game-changing solution that we are working on, where we are effectively going to be shrinking some of the core components into a silicon photonics chip the size of my fingernail. And this chip will be able to do the same, if not higher capacity. We're talking tens of gigabits per second to even hundreds of gigabits per second, but can point, steer, and also transmit and receive light. And that solution is going to then enhance our last mile connectivity. So you can think of LightBridge as the middle mile solution, and then eventually going into the last mile using our photonics chip solution. And in the end, what we are looking to build is a complete end-to-end light-based wireless solution, all the way from the subsea fiber to the end user.
Okay. And another question has just come in from Kodazzi Francesco Emilio. And his question is, okay, so about this one, is it true that optical fiber could be more expensive than the trend we're seeing in Europe? Have you considered entering the European market? And if so, what is the market there in terms of TAM?
Yeah. We have not fully entered the European market yet. We've been busy. There's so much demand right now in other parts, especially the emerging markets and even the US as well. But it is in our near-term horizon to enter into the European market as well. And yes, it is true, and not just in Europe, but everywhere, the cost of optical fiber has gone up significantly, the actual glass itself, because of data center buildouts. The labor costs are not coming down. The labor costs are actually going up. And the cost of the bay leaves and the right of way and the permitting costs are also going up because it's extremely disruptive for the communities when somebody were to dig and tear apart the road. So this is creating an interesting challenge, because on one hand, we need connectivity, but we are not able to get through because of all these cost challenges. So we are seeing a scenario, and that's one of the reasons why we built the TCO calculator, because you can see the growth of demand and traffic going up, but we are also seeing the costs associated to provide connectivity going up. And what we are really trying to provide is a tool that allows you to compare at any given market and any given time with the economics that is prevailing to see if it makes sense. But as far as the European market, we're not there yet, and we'll be launching into the European market very soon.
Okay, and fantastic. Now we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you one last question, which kind of, I think, will be a nice way to wrap this up, and for you to underline sort of everything you've, all the work you've done recently. Is again, I'm going to go back to Georgina Santiago, who says, congratulations on the TCO calculator. It seems to answer the fundamental question every operator starts with, which is, under my current conditions, is this technology a viable option? You were talking about that before, but her question really is, have you found that the tool changes operators' assumptions about where WOC can fit in within their network evolution strategy?
I think the way to think about this is we want to provide information and knowledge out there. We can't get to and reach to every single operator, but what we can do is provide them the information so that they can make a well-educated decision. And before they run off and buy strands of fiber and deploying it everywhere, or deploying a whole bunch of RF, like for example, I saw a question about E-band, which we want to cover, let's say 20 kilometers, you'll have to keep relaying it. Every 3 or 4 kilometers, you have to put another tower, another radio, and then keep on daisy chaining it. That's very inefficient if you were to think about it. But that's what people are aware of right now. When you start comparing that with FSO, where in a single shot you can cover 20 kilometers, that's a very economically viable way of actually solving it. So our goal and our exercise today was to provide you access to knowledge and information. In the end, you have to make what is right for your business and make the call. I will also say one last thing is that this is just one of the first tools. Very soon, we are going to be launching another exciting tool for the operators and everybody else, which is going to be allowing us to predict the anticipated availability. I saw a lot of questions about weather and everything else. So you can put your location and point A and point B, the distance. It'll tell you a predicted availability using our line of sight, but it'll tell you whether there's line of sight and what the availability could be. It's our planning tool, and that's going to be coming out very soon. So stay tuned for that. And I'll say that I also realized that we didn't get to all the questions, but please reach out to info@taaraconnect.com, and we are happy to answer any questions as a follow-on. But there's no safety concerns. Last thing I'll say, these are completely eye-safe lasers. and class
Yeah,
number certified.
I was actually going to, call time on the questions, but there's one last one which I think is a great one. So I'm going to ask you literally one last one, and then we'll call this. This is from Jeff Lang, and he's saying, given point-to-point optical comms requires precision steering, all of which you talked about, and FSMs are very limited in field of regard. What is the approach going beyond single point-to-point links to truly dynamic optical mesh? So basically, how do you go from one light bridge to hundreds of light bridge pros? And like, how do you just maybe walk them through that? And that will be the final question, I promise. Like, so you can
Okay. So one of the advancements, we spent almost a decade inside Google trying to perfect this whole pointing and steering. And so that is one of our secret sauce, which we have pioneered so that we can deal with any kind of weather perturbations and wind loading or anything else in tower space. And so that's why we have the FISMs and the optics in general. I think what you're really trying to get to is if you have enough of these, which we are starting to deploy in places like Rio, even here in the Bay Area, we're starting to deploy many of these in a concentrated area. And just like fiber, we will be able to reroute it using a meshing algorithm. I think Jeff is really trying to get to a point-to-multipoint solution. So I'm not at liberty to disclose any of that at this point, but eventually we can see a world where you could dynamically reroute traffic in a point-to-multipoint configuration. But right now they are all point-to-point links, but rerouted just like a fiber optic would.
Fantastic. I think with that we're really out of time. So Mahesh, any last quick comment, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, I'd say thank you for the wonderful questions. Apologies we couldn't get to all of it. Again, feel free to reach out at info@taaraconnect.com, and we'll be launching more tools. We are happy to answer all of the questions, and my goal is to make this useful for all of you, and hopefully you all found it informative. And I'm looking forward to having more of these conversations in the future.
Right. Thanks again, Mahesh. And on behalf of GSMAi Intelligence, thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, really some great questions and engagement. Thank you all, and see you next time.
Thank you.